Hello listeners, welcome back to Work It. My name is Adrian.
And it's me, Crispina. Today we have quite a delicious topic to get into, I have to say. It's about office romances. Now, I know you have worked with your wife, Adrian. You've told me about that, but maybe tell me a bit about office romances in general. Have you been involved or have you seen someone involved?
I have been involved, obviously. That was how it developed for me and my wife.
Oh.
And I got to know and seen some of my colleagues who hitched up together. It was quite interesting because they were trying so hard to not let the entire office know, but the entire office know. It is so obvious. And that's really very interesting.
If your office is a tiny one, I'm sure everybody would know.
Well, that's true, but still you see some telltale signs. They leave at the same time, come at the same time. Sometimes they stagger out to make it not so obvious, but it's just too obvious for everyone else.
Okay, so the newsroom where I've worked for much of my early career was rife with romances. Many of them were very innocent, like reporters dating each other. Many of them are married and they have children now. Now, of course, there were less innocent romances too. People having affairs, and somehow these kinds of liaisons travel up the grapevine, and before you know it, it's full-on K-drama.
The thing is, it's perfectly normal to find partners at work. Barack Obama met his wife, Michelle, at the law firm they work at. It's a perfect place to know someone right. Long hours, stressful projects together, sparks sure fly one.
Yeah, I agree. If it is happily ever after, I think that's okay. But sometimes there are grey areas, right? The most obvious thing is when a supervisor is in a relationship with a direct report. Or when a relationship starts really well and then turns ugly and this person is part of the team and it affects the morale.
So hopefully our guest today can help us unpack this a bit more. He's Daniel Lim, Head of Sales at Grvty Media and a host of the Daily Ketchup. Daniel has talked about meeting his fiancée on the job. Welcome, Daniel.
Hey guys, glad to be here and thanks so much for having me.
Daniel, you're a brave man to agree to this topic.
Oh no, what did I get myself into?
It is very odd for us to ask somebody about their personal life on this podcast, but it's a serious topic. So in the interest of business, we shall ask you, how did you meet your future wife?
We actually met at a startup that we were working at in 2015. They basically started a new division in which she was employee number 1. And about a couple months later, they hired me, employee number 2. Under that division, we were essentially the only 2 employees there. We were working long hours, doing proposals and decks. And so one thing led to another. I wouldn't say straight away, but one thing led to another somewhere down the line. Crispina, you actually mentioned there are certain scenarios where it's a little bit iffy, such as a manager and a subordinate. And that was actually the situation with myself and Natasha, because I actually came in to be her supervisor.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's a really funny story because when I first joined, exactly. And when I first joined, I remember my boss actually telling me, hey, look, we can't stop anything from happening, but please try your best to not enter office relationship. I think he knew that we were going to spend a lot of long hours together, especially because it was a startup. So that was always at the back of my mind. But I think it's similar when you tell somebody, don't think of a pineapple, you end up thinking of a pineapple.
Now I'm thinking about pineapple.
Exactly. And so ironically, when we eventually had to tell him that we were in a relationship, it was quite a funny scenario.
First of all, how long did it take before you guys decided, okay, this sounds a bit serious and I think we need to talk about it? Because a lot of people don't, right? They just keep it under wraps.
Yeah, we started working together and I think it took us about 2 months before we actually started dating. And at first we felt, okay, don't need to tell anything to anyone because we don't know where this is going. I think we're just going to try it out, see where it goes. And we don't want to rock the boat too much because if we decide, hey, maybe this is not worth pursuing, we don't want to scare anyone into thinking that maybe one is leaving or the other. I think it was after 2 months of dating that we actually became official first as boyfriend and girlfriend. And then when that happened, literally the Monday after, we immediately called for a meeting with our bosses to tell them, hey guys, gonna be upfront. I know you mentioned don't get into a relationship. Guess what?
We didn't listen to you.
Surprise. They were very understanding. As a startup as well, thankfully, I think it was quite liberal. And so because there weren't any official employees handbook and things like that. So I think it was quite liberal and they were very understanding. All we had to do was set some ground rules because at the end of the day, I was still a supervisor. There were issues or topics like appraisals, pay, promotions, things like that may prove unfair if I'm still overseeing that solely for her as well as the other team members, because we started growing the team after that. In terms of ground rules, we said that whenever it was anything to do with appraisal, promotion raises, someone else from the management team always has to be either present or involved in those discussions with my partner as well as with other team members, just to keep it fair and above board.
You know, when me and my wife were working together, I'll be especially harsh on her just to show to the rest that there is no favoritism at play.
Oh, why?
No.
What did you do? You scolded her in front of other people?
When it comes to performance, my expectation of her would be higher than the rest.
But was it in reaction to anything, or you just felt like you needed to do that?
I just felt that I need to overcompensate in the area, given that others know we are a couple, and I don't feel especially comfortable having them think that she's constantly getting the longer end of the stick because of nepotism, even though it's true.
For myself, it was the complete opposite. This was like my first serious adult relationship. So I kind of dove into too much into that early on, which I realized was a mistake. I'll try to be as fair as possible to everyone in the office, but at lunchtime, I would maybe go out with her. And that would send the wrong signals to the rest of the team because they feel like, why are they always going alone? The next time appraisal happens, is she going to get more like favorable treatment than myself? Can't remember whether someone pointed it out or like whether I realized it myself, but then that was when, okay, stop that. When we clock in, we enter the doors of the office, we are colleagues, and then 6 p.m. punch out.
Interestingly, Daniel and myself are actually part of the majority because in a survey done on US workers, SHRM actually found that 77% of people surveyed said they were in a romantic liaison but kept it undisclosed. I just want to understand, given that you shared you were in a startup, which of course there are less rules and all that, in your opinion, if you have worked in the civil service or maybe in an MNC, do you think you may have reacted differently?
Perhaps. It really depends because I think company to company, they have different policies. It is a little bit scarier when the hierarchy seems a little less flat and you're a little bit more worried about how it may be perceived up top. I think for us, the hierarchy was quite flat because right after me was already the founders of the startup. You can kind of have a pulse on how do they feel about certain personal issues or topics. So I do believe I might have been a little bit different. I don't think we would have not pursued a relationship in that sense, but I think we might have kept it a little bit quiet. I think I read somewhere as well that companies that tend to have stricter policies on office romance, it doesn't mean that there's going to be no office romance. It actually just means that people are going to keep it a secret.
Correct,
so I think that might have been the case. Yeah.
It seems like an inevitability anyway. It seems like the best place to meet people. We talked about stress, you talked about working long hours together. That sounds very fertile ground for actually knowing somebody really well, right?
Yeah, it's the perfect recipe actually, because I think like Singapore is known in the world to like one of the longest working hours, and so we spend like so much of our time at work. So it just makes perfect sense.
You actually said this, right? When it was clear to your bosses, the two of them are seeing each other, one is actually responsible for the other's progress in their careers. And there are other people in the team as well. So putting in place things like another person should be in charge of certain things. You shouldn't be the main one to make the call about your girlfriend's, let's say you want to promote her or how much you're going to pay her, etc. How do you still scrub out the idea that you are always going to be in her corner? There's no way you're going to be able to escape that, right?
What Natasha and I did it very early on was we spoke about our rules of engagement at work and how things were going to be like that.
Okay, tell us your rules of engagement. PDA?
No, for sure. So like PDA is out of the question. I think secondly is that when we're at work, I will have to speak to her as a colleague and she would have to speak to me as a colleague as well. And I think she completely understood. It was very much a discussion and she was in full agreement because she was also close to her other colleagues that were part of the team and she didn't want to feel like she was getting any favoritism because if she were to get promotion, she wants everyone to know that she deserves it as well. So I think it was very clear to us once we entered the doors of the office space, we were colleagues. And I think it was important to do that across the board. So if there were any fights that might have happened the night before or the morning of, it was so important that once we were out the door, it's pause on relationship fight. We're now at work and then we can continue at after 6 or 7.
I was just going to ask you. So if you had a tiff, right, at work and it was surely spill into, hey, why did you say that in front of these people or whatever? Or why did you do that? You know, like Adrian, right? Your wife was upset with you all the time, wasn't she?
Oh yes, I had so many of it. We argue in the bedroom, bring to boardroom, argue in boardroom, bring to bedroom.
Oh no.
That has always been a constant theme and it became a flywheel. So I'm quite impressed on how he managed to keep things so compartmentalize.
It wasn't always that way. We had to go through a few scenarios first before we realized, okay, this was the solution. So there were definitely instances, I actually remember this quite clearly. I had to reassign a project to someone else. Natasha completely disagreed with the way how I did it because it was quite urgent. And so I didn't really get to speak to all parties and say, hey, are you okay with that? Are you okay with this? And so I went ahead and informed the person, sorry, I'm reassigning this project to someone else. And she wasn't quite happy about it, even though she wasn't involved in that interaction. So it spilled over for a couple of days. And that's when we kind of went, okay, I think we've got to be able to hit pause on either side of the bench whenever it happens, whether we're in the office. But Adrian, I'm curious, so like how did you manage to resolve it, or was that always something that happened across time?
I think it happened more often during the initial phase because we were both very, very young and immature. So we do not really know how to handle such situation. And neither do we have all the ground rules that you mentioned you have with Natasha. So progressively, I guess it became better. But ultimately, she decided it's better for her to work outside, not together. Honestly, I'm not easy to work with. I think it would be a better situation for us. But I guess it really depends on how one is able to manage it. Like in your case, I think you managed it much better than I did.
It's just much easier to avoid all these different potential pitfalls. The ground rules were required for it to begin with. I think it's just easier for us to operate in different divisions. I think that'll be better for everyone. And it proved correct. I started moving more towards the content side of things. She stayed within sales at that point of time and things were great. And then when she decided to leave, I think about a year and a half ago to join a different company, that was when I decided, hey, I think sales was always something that I was very interested in, and I kind of gave that up a bit because we wanted that separation. And so I thought, hey, why not jump back in that ship again? And so that's why I'm back in the sales department.
So that's something I noticed too among the people I know who've had relationships with each other. Usually the women eventually leave, right? Maybe the easier, cleaner solution. It's hard to continue like balancing this. Hey, relationships are already hard. Work is hard. And you've put the two together. It's cleaner if you're just working either in different departments or somebody moves to something else.
Yeah, the suggestion to work in different departments was her suggestion. But to leave companies, that was just something that she wanted to do independently of the relationship. I think she was looking for a new opportunity and a new challenge as well. I don't know if it's mainly women though. It just happened to be the case for Adrian and myself. But that is an interesting thought actually. I should mention that I know early on I mentioned that I was her superior and she was working under me, but I was quite worried about the implications. And so even though I was interested in her, I never made any moves. She was the one that made the first move, the second move, the third move. She was the one asking me out and things like that.
Put it on record.
I'm putting it on record. Just indemnifying myself by making her look quite bad actually. But
Okay, next episode we'll get her on.
Yes.
She's not here to defend herself, okay, Daniel?
She's not, which is why I took the opportunity to say those things.
Hey everyone, my name's Stephen Chia, and I'm host of CNA's weekly news podcast, Heart of the Matter. Now, each week, my job is to ask questions you have, like why is the COE so high? Why aren't singles dating? Or what is going on with the red-hot property market in Singapore? If you want the views behind the news, then tune in each week as we get to the heart of the matter. We are on the CNA and Me Listen apps and wherever you get your podcasts. Hit follow or subscribe so you don't miss an episode when it drops.
There's also different kinds of relationship as well. In ABC News in US, they have to pull two of their anchors off air when their romance came to light. The story here is they were married to other people at the time, and then photos were leaked online, leading to TJ Holmes and Amy Robach to say that they have already separated, so the relationship was recent. So in today's day and age with social media, honestly, how discreet can you be, right? Have you seen anything of such cases? Do you think this is something that would be deemed as sackable, especially when it is a private issue? What's your take on this?
Personally, I haven't seen anything of the nature. The furthest I've seen is maybe people in long-term relationships that maybe get very friendly. And by very friendly, I just mean like sociable, spending time. At the start, we're quite fun. So we do drink at the end of the day. We have a karaoke machine and things like that. And so I think it's just in terms of spending time, having a good laugh, we're all just very close as friends. My take is that it is a private issue. If it is company policy that something like that happened, then the rules were made clear. But if it wasn't already stated in an employee handbook, I think it becomes a little bit worrying if companies are getting too involved in personal issues. I feel that there should be some form of separation as long as it didn't affect productivity. Of course, that's always a grey area. You don't know how that might have affected the whole production team, perhaps. And so I think that there's just a lot of considerations, and I personally would try and be a little less heavy-handed in that sense. And I think if companies are too strict, then what happens is that these things do happen in secret. And if couples aren't forthcoming with their relationships, then it's not on the radar of the management, and so surprises like this become a surprise. As opposed to if a couple is upfront, disclose that, hey, we're in a relationship. At least the potential pitfalls of whether one leaves and do you expect both to leave and things like that, at least they become visible to management just so that they can expect it along the way.
In the case of the presenters, because they're high-profile folks, right? The president basically said, it's not a violation of policy because they don't report to each other. But he called it a distraction. So it affects the brand. Maybe it affects the way people see things.
It would definitely encourage a lot of pantry talk.
Yeah.
It would. And I can imagine, I guess with ABC News, they want to be seen as credible, and this might affect credibility, especially with anchors. If it does have business implications, then perhaps there are a little bit more grounds there. But I think with usual cases, rank and file employees, or with other form of MNCs or corporations where the employees aren't that public facing. Even as a manager, for me, I do see the potential pitfalls in relationships. Like I mentioned, one of it could be that if one decides to leave, do you risk losing both? Or if one has to be let go, do you risk offending the other who's actually perfectly fine? Or what happens if couples break up?
If the relationship is stable and adult and successful, there are relationships which become really toxic, and then the aftermath is felt by everyone. There's always that.
Yeah, I think what's important for any form of management is to have that open door. And even after Natasha and I got together, or even after we joined Grvty, we've actually had maybe about 2 or 3 other couples getting together in the last 4 years or so. And each one of them actually disclosed it. I think if you have a really open door culture, my door's always open, really just come to us about anything and we won't reprimand you. It's really just about understanding and having that transparency. Then I think it helps to just pre-plan for those things. If anything goes south there, we might potentially risk both of them, but at least we can plan for that. It's also important that if you're someone in a relationship, to also have time to focus on the relationship. I think that was just something else that I was very mindful of when I was in a relationship with Natasha and we were working together.
Yeah, it does sound like a struggle, to be honest. If my husband was in my team, it's an added pressure for me.
There were definitely pros and cons. I think the pros is that you really were spending almost 24 hours together almost every day. I mean, after a while, like Natasha and I started living together, it was 24/7. The pitfall of that is sometimes you find it difficult to actually talk or actually genuinely want to like spend time with each other because it's hard to spend like my entire day like with you. When you're in a relationship, I think a very common topic was like housework. You can spend hours just talking about your work because you might not know what the other person has been through the whole day.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
with her, it's like, I know exactly what she did and she knows exactly what I did. And so it took us a while, but I would say maybe 6 months to a year after that initial sprint or that start relationship, we had to really consciously go out, consciously be a couple and turn off work and say, okay, it's time for us to really go on dates, right? And find new things to talk about. And since she's left, it's actually gotten a lot better because now she can talk about work and I'm genuinely curious. in terms of like having conversations, I'm genuinely curious because I have no idea who she's talking about, and that's great.
Yeah, that's great.
I had the same issue as well, and I found it to be very stressful thinking about, okay, knock off already, what do I talk to you about? Like, whatever we wanted to talk about, we have already covered. To the extent, even though we work in separate businesses or companies right now, I still get PTSD, or I try to refrain talking to her about work. I think it's really because of the earlier bad experiences that I had.
Right. So even until today,
I try to refrain. She will come to and talk to me about work, but I try not to share with her about work because it just brings me back to those days.
He has PTSD, clearly.
Yeah, I have PTSD.
No.
Okay, I just want to close by getting your take on this. We do need to make a distinction between consensual relationships, right, in the office versus the ones which are clearly unwanted. I think a lot of women go through this when a colleague takes a fancy to you and then he starts trying to chat you up, trying to ask for projects that they can work on with you together. And even though make it clear that you're not that interested or you are in a relationship with somebody else, as a manager, are you very conscious about that as well? At your team, they tend to be young, especially if you guys are very close. There's a lot of after work socializing going on.
Yeah, especially with the younger people. I've read somewhere, especially with what happened during COVID, people are less able to react socially. And when someone actually is nicer to them, they take it as a cue, oh, this person liked me.
Yeah, and overcompensate sometimes. We don't prohibit office romances. We do have a strong sense of where the relationships are, just in terms of even friendships or in terms of cliques within the company, because we tend to dine together. So lunches, and sometimes if we have to work late dinners, we tend to have together as a group. And so we do have a sense of who might like who or things like that. We do have a gauge. We'll check in individually with both of them to just see, are they both interested? Is one only intervene and say, hey, I think this is not such a good idea. I don't think she's interested. So, it hasn't happened too often. I think
But
maybe
it
only,
has happened.
yeah, maybe just a handful of occasions, just to make sure that any unwanted advances are stopped in its place. And if it's consensual, then it's consensual. I remember hearing or reading about this policy that is quite cool, actually. It's from Meta, which is that you're not allowed to ask someone out twice if the first time you asked didn't result in a date. Okay, it's quite hard to actually enforce.
It is very high standard, So that means the first time I ask someone and the guy says no, I can't ask him again.
Yeah, might seem a little harsh, but you gotta put a number to it so it's measurable.
So you gotta plan your first ask very well.
Very well. Very, very well. But I think it's just to make sure that people don't get persistent unwanted advances.
Yes.
Adrian mentioned Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. I think Barack asked her like maybe 4 or 5 times. I think.
Exactly. I was just going to say there are some people who persisted and they won.
Yeah, but it's probably in the minority of cases though. If you just don't like this person at all and then they keep asking you out, I think that might be quite a difficult situation to be in, and I think you don't want to risk that person leaving for that. It's always better to have clarity on these things, and it's not always easy because it's the issues of the heart essentially, and the heart is complicated. The easiest thing to do for me is always to have measurable outcomes, like metas, maybe asking twice.
At least twice, come on. Give the guy another chance, right?
Yeah, girls can ask guys out as well.
Girl.
So
I'll give the girl another chance.
Yeah.
Since Natasha made her first move on you.
Thankfully, she did. I really don't have much game, so I would probably still be single today if she didn't.
And good for you then, right? Daniel?
I'm very lucky.
That was quite wonderful, actually, because what I got from you is that, first of all, you need to be open and not be so draconian, because it's relationships about life, right? And the second thing is to be clear about the boundaries, and that always helps. Thanks, Daniel, for sharing your views. Please check out the Daily Ketchup. That's the podcast, right, that you host?
So yeah, guys, if you haven't heard of the Daily Ketchup podcast, I host it with 3 other friends, all from Grvty Media, and we talk about anything under the sun, from current affairs, politics, to relationships, and things a little bit more raunchy than relationships. So come join us. We're on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, it's been really, really interesting to have this episode today to learn more about office romance, something which is not as serious as our usual topic, but interesting nonetheless. And it also helps us to understand that this is something that is, in a way, quite inevitable as we spend more and more time at the office. For some people, even their office romance or hiding their office romance might be the most strenuous thing they do at work. But having said that, it is still something that I guess is a natural part of ourselves, and it's something that I hope everyone could just not encouraging them to give a go, but to be more considerate for romances.
Yeah, I would say I agree with Daniel. In a talent-scarce era, banning office romances doesn't seem to me to be the way to go. In any case, people will do what they want anyway. You can't stop love, right?
Yes, but you have to manage it carefully. Keep things neutral, no excessive PDA, ensure some basic standards of ethics and behavior is maintained, and you don't really want to be that person everyone talks about at the water cooler.
Okay, speaking of water cooler, please do send us ideas on what you'd like to hear on the Work It podcast. Till next week, I'm Crispina.
The team that works on this podcast is Joanne Chan, Jacqueline Chan, and Sai. I'm Adrian. See you next week.